And that's interesting because it brings up the question around Kanalaland as well. Because from what I understand, there are independents who've been administrating there who've done a very poor job. And so what would be nationally seen as opposite political party members of the ANC and the DA, came together and said, in order to provide better services at a municipal level, let's form a coalition or an agreement, if you want to call it. And because of the ripple effect that might have or how it might be perceived at a national level, there was talk of disciplinary action against the DA members. I don't know what the ANC has said. But in a way, that's where the issue of national and local really muddy the waters.
Yes, and I think that's where South Africa is not yet a very mature democracy. If I make an example of many European countries are run by minority governments, that means you got 30%, but you are the biggest party. And when you're a minority government rather than a coalition, it means that for every vote you want to make that's important, you have to find some party to side with you. So you may be a social democratic party. On some votes you will have to go to the center or the Liberals. On other votes you will have to go to the left or the Greens. And that leads to a relatively unstable government. But what it does lead to in a divided society is the need to form consensus, at least with the majority views reflected by
that's
parties.
Across the board of political parties.
So in Kannaland, if maybe in 20 years' time, for me, I would say it's fantastic that the parties that represent 80% of the voters can at least bargain and talk. They will not go into a coalition, that I'm sure of. But at least they may govern together rather than the previous situation where a tiny little independent party basically ran the show.
Yeah.
Not accountable to anybody other than 1 or 2 wards, you know. Ran it very badly. Nobody could really intervene because they don't have national or provincial structures to bring them into line. And you end up with a situation we had in Oudtshoorn, where you did not have effective government for the last 3 years because there was no majority party. And the small independents would go with the DA one moment, with the ANC the next moment, and then every time government would change. The mayor would change, the municipal manager would change, then the speaker would be from another party, wouldn't call a meeting. So for 3 months you wouldn't have any council.
But you would
no
be
one was
paying for
represented.
councillors.
Yes. And eventually the province, together with the national minister, that's the DA and the ANC ministers, agreed to put them under administration.
So that is the recourse if things really fall apart and disintegrate, is that provincial and national structures can come in and say, you guys have made a complete mess of this local government and we need to intervene.
And they, of course, they can only do it when service delivery is in peril. Okay, and yeah. I think one of the other things to understand about all these coalitions and minority governments is for most decisions in a council, you only need a majority of the people who are in the house.
That's important.
So if the EFF boycotts, for example, in Joburg now, the ANC may have a majority of councillors in the house because the ANC has 4 or 5% more than the DA there. Okay, but for big decisions, like your budget, who's your mayor, who's your municipal manager, and your IDP. Those really are the big ones. You need a majority of councillors who were elected.
Okay, so that's the full list.
Yes, and that's why all these temporary coalitions, I would call them, are being put together to make that decision. They may fall apart afterwards. The signed ones, where the UDM and COPE and so on have agreed with the DA, we are now in a coalition government. Those will result in maybe the UDM or COPE getting a seat on a mayoral committee. They will govern together. But the EFF is only saying we will vote for you on the big issues so that you can govern, but we remain opposition.
And so then what is it likely to look like when there are other council meetings where you don't necessarily need the full list present, you just need a majority amongst that contingent for that
I think it's going to get weird. For example, if the EFF pursues their sort of ultra-left agenda of saying we're not going to support the budget if you don't build so many houses in Orange Farm or whatever, the DA may need the ANC to support the budget in order to pass it. And the ANC would obviously then say, well, there's certain things that we also want, maybe not as unreasonable as that, but our priorities also need to be reflected. So if you're running a minority government, and the DA has got under 40% in Johannesburg, they're running a minority government, it means that you have to have a big partner
Okay. And
coming
that's where
in
it
with
could
you,
well be the ANC.
and there will
on
be a
some
lot
matters.
of bargaining. I don't think that's a problem,
Yeah.
because I think, in a way, if the ANC with over 40% of the vote in Joburg is completely excluded from big decisions, it also means that their voters are not effectively represented in the process. So for me, local consensus seeking, local bargaining around major issues, trying to serve as many of the voters as possible, and not going for, you know, you in your ghetto and I'm in mine,
Yes.
and we kind of mutually exclusive in terms of who we serve. That's a very good thing.